It was almost midnight when the rain started again. The streets were mostly empty, the kind of quiet that only happens when the city falls asleep. Cars passed once in a while, their headlights cutting through the mist and disappearing down the wet road. A black car slowed near the corner, its tires making soft ripples through the puddles. Inside sat a man in a gray suit, his tie loosened, his eyes tired from another long day. His name was Ethan Ward, a man who had everything most people dream of: money, power, and respect. He had built his company from the ground up, working through endless nights until he became one of the wealthiest men in the city. But tonight, none of that seemed to matter. The silence inside his car felt heavier than usual. The glow of the dashboard lights cast a soft blue tint on his face, and the rain tapping against the windshield sounded almost like a whisper. As he waited for the light to turn green, he noticed something odd at the bus stop across the street. Under the flickering streetlight sat a small shape, a child curled up on the bench covered in a thin blanket. At first, Ethan thought it might be a pile of clothes left behind. But then the shape moved. He leaned forward. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. Her hair was messy, her face barely visible beneath the blanket she held tightly around her shoulders. The bus stop offered no real protection from the cold wind or the rain that blew sideways through the open sides. Ethan frowned. "What's a kid doing out here this late?" he muttered to himself. The light turned green, but he didn't move. Cars behind him honked, forcing him to drive forward. His chest tightened as he looked in the rearview mirror, watching the girl shrink into the distance. He told himself someone must be coming for her. Maybe her parents were late. Maybe she missed the bus. Maybe there was a simple explanation. But deep down, he knew it didn't look right. By the time he reached his neighborhood, a place filled with tall iron gates and perfectly trimmed hedges, his thoughts were still on that little girl. He parked his car, entered his quiet mansion, and kicked off his shoes by the door. Normally, the smell of coffee or the sound of the housekeeper moving around greeted him. But tonight, the place was empty. Ethan walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and stared at his reflection in the window. Rain slid down the glass outside, mirroring the unease that sat heavy in his chest. He had grown up with nothing, an old apartment with leaky pipes and a mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. He knew what it felt like to be cold, hungry, and scared, and yet over the years he had learned to look away. His success had built walls around him, high enough to block out the world's pain. But tonight those walls felt weak. He tried to shake it off. He had an early meeting the next morning. He told himself there was nothing he could do, but as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the image of that small figure at the bus stop wouldn't leave his mind. He imagined her shivering, trying to stay warm, wondering if anyone would come for her. The thought made him restless. He tossed, turned, and finally sat up, rubbing his temples. Around 2 in the morning, he got out of bed and walked into his home office. He stood by the large window overlooking the city, the rain blurring the lights outside. His desk was stacked with papers, contracts, and reports, but none of them seemed to matter at that moment. He whispered under his breath, "What if she's still there?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He tried to tell himself that someone had probably taken her home, but something inside him refused to believe it. When morning came, the sky was still gray. Ethan hadn't slept much. He showered quickly, skipped breakfast, and told his driver to take a different route to the office. "Let's go through Riverside," he said, pretending it was just a change of scenery. The driver nodded, unaware of the reason. As the car neared the intersection where the bus stop stood, Ethan's heart beat faster. He looked through the tinted glass, searching. The bench was empty this time. The blanket was gone. He felt both relieved and uneasy. "Sir?" the driver asked, noticing his silence. "Nothing," Ethan replied softly. "Just keep going." But he couldn't focus for the rest of the day. During his meetings, his mind kept drifting back. He pictured the girl again, her small body huddled against the cold. Who was she? Why was she alone? By evening, Ethan had made up his mind. He returned to the same spot after work, this time parking across the street. He sat quietly, watching the people come and go. Office workers hurried past, couples walked under umbrellas, buses stopped and left. But the girl never appeared. He got out of the car and walked to a small convenience store nearby. The man behind the counter, a friendly older fellow, looked up from his newspaper. "Evening," Ethan said, pretending to browse the shelves. "I was wondering. That bus stop down the road. Have you ever seen a little girl there? Small, maybe 8 or 9, with a blanket?" The man squinted, thinking. "Oh, yeah. I've seen her a few times, poor kid. Been sitting there for days, sometimes late at night. I thought someone was supposed to pick her up, but no one ever comes." Ethan's heart sank. "Do you know where she goes?" The man shook his head. "No idea. Sometimes she disappears for a day or two, then she's back. Folks say she's waiting for her mother." "Her mother?" "That's what she told a woman who tried to help her last week. Said her mom told her to wait there and not to move." Broke the woman's heart. Ethan nodded slowly, thanked the man, and walked out into the cold air. He stood there for a moment, his breath fogging in front of him. He looked at the empty bus stop again, his mind torn between logic and something deeper, something human. He could have just gone home again. But this time he didn't. He drove to a nearby store and bought a warm blanket, a box of snacks, and a thermos of soup. He returned to the bus stop, placed the items carefully under the bench, and sat back in his car. He waited for nearly an hour, watching the rain fall harder, watching the people rush home to warmth and light. No one came for the little girl. By midnight, he finally left, his heart heavier than before. That night, lying in bed, Ethan realized how long it had been since something had truly moved him. His life had been all about numbers, profits, meetings, contracts. But this small act of kindness had stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. He remembered how his mother used to say, "If you ever see someone cold and you can help, don't look away. The world changes one person at a time." As he closed his eyes, he made a quiet promise to himself. If the girl was still there the next day, he would not just drive by again. He would stop. He would ask her name. He would do something, anything, to make sure she wasn't left alone in the cold. He didn't know it yet, but that small decision, born in the middle of a sleepless night, was about to change not only the girl's life, but his own as well. The next morning came slowly, the kind of gray morning that felt more like evening than day. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy with clouds. Ethan barely touched his coffee. He sat at the kitchen counter, staring at nothing, the spoon resting in his hand. His phone buzzed a few times, reminders about meetings, calls, and schedules. He ignored them all. His thoughts were somewhere else, back at the bus stop, back to the image of the small girl huddled under the blanket. He finally stood up, grabbed his coat, and told his driver, "Let's go. I'll tell you the direction on the way." The driver nodded and started the car. Ethan looked out the window as they drove through the quiet streets, his eyes scanning for the familiar corner. When they reached the same intersection, he leaned forward, heart beating faster. The bus stop was empty again. The bench was wet from the rain. The blanket he had left was gone. He stepped out of the car and walked to the bench. The street smelled of damp concrete and exhaust. There was no sign of her, no bag, no footprints, nothing. Just silence. He stood there for a long moment, his hands in his pockets, not sure what to feel. Maybe someone had found her. Maybe she was safe now. He wanted to believe that. But a quiet unease still tugged at his chest. Ethan turned to a small flower shop nearby, its glass windows fogged from the morning chill. Inside, an older woman arranged fresh tulips in a vase. He stepped in, and the soft bell above the door chimed. "Good morning," the woman greeted, her voice gentle. "Morning," Ethan replied, giving her a polite nod. "Can I ask you something? You've got a clear view of that bus stop, don't you?" She paused, tilting her head. "Yes, I do. Why? Have you seen a little girl there recently? Small, maybe 8 or 9. She's been sitting there some nights." The woman's face softened. "Ah, yes. I've seen her a few times. Always alone. Poor thing. I called the local shelter once, but by the time they came, she was gone." "Do you know anything about her?" Ethan asked. The woman sighed. "Not much. She keeps to herself. Someone said she's waiting for her mother. I tried giving her hot tea once, but she was too shy to take it. She looked scared." Ethan thanked the woman, his heart sinking again. As he stepped back into the cool air, a voice inside him whispered, "You can't just walk away this time." He pulled out his phone and called his assistant, Clara. "Good morning." "Mr. Ward," she answered. "Clara, I need a favor. Can you contact the local child services office for me? There's a girl, around 8 years old, who's been seen at the Riverside bus stop several times. I just need to know if anyone's reported her missing. There was a pause. Of course, sir. I'll look into it right away. Thank you, he said and hung up. He drove to the office after that, but his mind wasn't on the meetings or the financial reports waiting on his desk. Every number, every chart, every voice in the boardroom felt distant. He found himself staring at the rain sliding down the window again, the way it had the night before. At lunch, Clara walked into his office holding a small folder. I made some calls, she said, sitting across from him. There's no report matching that description. I checked with the local shelters, too. They've seen a few kids come through this month, but no one fits what you described. Ethan frowned. So she's not registered anywhere? Apparently not, Clara said softly. Would you like me to reach out to the police? He hesitated. No, not yet. She might be hiding for a reason. Clara nodded slowly, understanding his tone. Do you want me to help you look? He gave a small smile. No, I'll handle it. But thank you. That evening, Ethan didn't go home after work. He drove straight back to Riverside. The lights were coming on across the city, and the streets shimmered with reflections from passing cars. The bus stop looked the same, quiet, empty, forgotten. He parked nearby again, turned off the engine, and waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The street grew quieter as people disappeared into their homes. He almost gave up. And then he saw movement at the corner. The same small figure appeared from the shadows, carrying the same worn backpack. Her steps were slow, cautious. She climbed onto the bench and pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Ethan's chest tightened. She was still out here. He waited a moment, unsure how to approach her without scaring her. Then he stepped out of the car, holding a paper bag in one hand. The air was cold enough that his breath turned white. He walked toward the bus stop slowly. The girl looked up, startled. Her eyes were wide, alert. It's okay, he said softly, raising a hand to show he meant no harm. I'm not going to hurt you, she didn't answer. She just pulled the blanket closer. I saw you here last night, Ethan continued gently. I brought you something to eat. That's all. He placed the bag on the ground a few feet away and stepped back. You don't have to talk to me. But it's warm food. There's soup and some bread. The girl hesitated, glancing between him and the bag. Finally, she reached for it, slowly opening it to peek inside. Her voice was small when she spoke. Thank you. Ethan smiled faintly. You're welcome. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. Cars passed by, the wind blew softly, and the sound of distant traffic echoed. What's your name? He asked quietly. Lily, she said after a pause, her voice barely above a whisper. That's a nice name, Ethan said. I'm Ethan. She nodded slightly, still clutching the blanket. Are you waiting for someone, Lily? Her eyes lowered to the ground. My mom. She told me to wait here. She said she'd come back. How long have you been waiting? She didn't answer right away. She looked at the sky, her small face tightening a little. A while. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to ask more, but something told him not to push. The last thing he wanted was to make her feel afraid. He crouched down so he wasn't towering over her. Listen, it's really cold tonight. There's a shelter not far from here. They have warm beds and food. You could go there for a little while. I could help you get there if you'd like. Her head shook quickly. No, I have to stay here. Mom said she'll come. Ethan hesitated. Okay, he said softly. I understand. He reached into his pocket and took out a small folded note. If you ever change your mind, this has the name of the place and a phone number. You can show it to anyone nearby and they'll take you there. It's safe. Lily took the paper but didn't look at it. She held it in her hand, quiet. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, unsure what else to say. Then he smiled gently. I'll come by tomorrow just to check on you, all right? She didn't answer, but her eyes softened a little, and that was enough for him. That night, Ethan went home with a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because no child should ever be out there like that, and relief because at least she wasn't completely gone. He knew now that she was real, not just some image haunting his memory. For the next few days, Ethan made it part of his routine. He'd stop by the bus stop after work, sometimes bringing food, sometimes a blanket or small toy. He never forced conversation, just sat nearby, keeping her company for a few minutes before leaving. Slowly, Lily began to trust him. She started to talk more. Not much, but enough to let him see pieces of her world. She told him that she and her mother used to stay in a small apartment. Her mom worked at different places, cleaning houses, working in a cafe, doing anything she could find. One day her mother had told her she was going to meet someone about a new job, and that Lily should wait at the bus stop until she came back. But she never did. Ethan listened quietly, his chest tight. "Have you gone back to your home since then?" he asked one evening. Lily shook her head. "The door was locked. I don't have the key anymore. Do you have any other family?" She looked down at her shoes. "No." The word was soft but heavy. Ethan felt the air catch in his lungs. He wanted to help, but he knew he had to move carefully. Kids like her often held on to hope tighter than anything. The wrong word could make her run. That night, after leaving her some food and making sure she had an extra blanket, he called Clara again. "Clara, I need you to find a child social worker I can trust. Someone quiet, kind, and patient. No publicity. I just need help understanding how to handle this the right way." Clara didn't ask many questions. She knew her boss well enough to hear the weight in his voice. "I'll find someone," she said. 2 days later, Ethan met with a woman named Grace. She worked privately with at-risk children and had spent years volunteering in shelters. When Ethan told her about Lily, she listened carefully. "She sounds scared," Grace said. "Kids in her position usually are. The best thing you can do is keep showing up. Let her see you're consistent. Once she trusts you fully, I can meet her quietly." "No pressure," Ethan nodded. "Thank you, I don't want to frighten her. She's been alone too long." Grace smiled kindly. "You're doing more than most people would. Just keep being there." That evening, Ethan went back again. The air was colder than before, and the wind blew sharp against his face. Lily sat in her usual spot, her small hands tucked under the blanket. When she saw him, she smiled faintly, the first real smile he had seen from her. "You came back," she said softly. "Of course," Ethan replied, sitting on the other end of the bench. "I told you I would." For a moment, they just sat in silence, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. The world felt quieter there, away from the noise of offices and meetings. He handed her a small cup of hot chocolate. She took it with both hands and sipped slowly, her face warming. "Do you go to school, Lily?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "I used to. Not anymore. Would you like to go again?" She thought for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Maybe." Ethan smiled faintly. "You're smart. I can tell. You deserve to go back." She didn't answer, but the way she looked down and smiled told him she liked hearing that. When it started to drizzle, Ethan stood and opened an umbrella, holding it over both of them. She looked up surprised. "You'll get wet," she said. "I'll survive," he said, and she giggled softly. It was a small sound, but it filled the night like music. As the rain fell gently around them, Ethan realized how deeply this small child had entered his thoughts and his heart. Something in her reminded him of a part of himself he'd buried long ago, the boy who once waited by windows for a mother who came home late from work, too tired to smile. He knew then that he couldn't just be a passerby anymore. He would help her. He didn't know how yet, but he would. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with money, business, or success. It was simply about being human and doing what was right. The next few days passed quietly. Each evening, Ethan stopped by the same bus stop after work. It had become almost a habit now, as natural as checking his phone or drinking his morning coffee. Every day he found himself wondering how Lily was doing, if she had eaten, if she was safe. Sometimes she was already there when he arrived, sitting quietly with her small blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Other times he had to wait, watching the street until her small figure appeared at the corner. Each time she saw him, her eyes brightened a little more. They had started talking more now. Her voice was still soft, but she smiled more often. Ethan never asked too many questions at once. He just listened. She told him little things at first, what she liked to eat, how she used to help her mother wash dishes, how she liked watching the sky change colors when the sun went down. Ethan listened to every word, even the smallest ones. One night he brought her a sandwich and an apple. She looked at the apple for a while before saying, "My mom used to buy these. She said they make you strong." "That's true," Ethan said, smiling. "She sounds like a smart woman." Lily nodded and took a small bite. For a moment, her face looked peaceful. As she ate, Ethan looked at her carefully. She was thinner than he first thought. Her cheeks were hollow and her clothes looked worn. Her shoes had holes near the toes. He took a slow breath and said, "Lily, are you sure you don't want to stay somewhere warm tonight? Just for one night?" Her head moved from side to side. "No, what if Mom comes back and I'm not here?" He understood her fear. It was the kind of hope that children held on to like a treasure. "If your mom comes back," he said gently, "she'll want to see you safe. Don't you think she'd be happy knowing you were warm and taken care of?" Lily didn't answer. She just looked down at her shoes, quietly swinging her legs. Ethan didn't push further. He had learned that with Lily, patience was more powerful than persuasion. That night, after leaving her some extra food and a small flashlight, Ethan sat in his car for a long time before driving home. He called Grace, the social worker, and updated her. "She trusts you," Grace said. "That's a good sign. Don't rush her. Children like Lily build trust slowly, but once they do, they'll follow you anywhere." Ethan sighed. "I just don't want to make the wrong move. I can't stand the thought of her spending another night out there." Grace's voice softened. "I understand. But remember, she survived this long because she's learned to be careful. You're doing the right thing by letting her come to you at her own pace." That advice stayed with him. A few days later, Ethan brought her a small box wrapped in paper. When he handed it to her, she blinked in surprise. "What's this?" she asked. "Just something I thought you might like," he said. She opened it carefully. Inside was a simple blue sweater, soft and warm. Her small hands ran over the fabric. "It's for you," Ethan said. "It's getting colder." Her voice trembled slightly as she said, "Thank you." She put it on right away, the sleeves a bit long for her arms. She smiled shyly. "It's nice," Ethan smiled back. "I'm glad you like it." He didn't tell her that he had spent half an hour choosing that sweater, walking through aisles of children's clothes he'd never noticed before in his life. He didn't tell her that he had no idea what sizes children wore, and that he'd asked the store clerk for help. All he cared about was that it fit, and that it made her a little warmer. Over the next week, they talked more. Lily began to tell him pieces of her story, bits of her life before the bus stop. She told him about the small apartment she and her mother once shared, how her mom used to make pancakes on Sundays, even when there wasn't much food left in the fridge, how they would laugh while drawing pictures together at night. But when Ethan gently asked about her father, she only said, "He left when I was little." And when he asked about the day her mother disappeared, she said quietly, "She told me to wait. She said she'd come back soon." Her voice would always drop after that, so Ethan never pressed her more. One evening, while they were sitting under the bus stop's dim light, a cold wind swept through the street. Lily shivered. Ethan looked at her and said softly, "Lily, I know you want to wait for your mom, but it's getting too cold for you to stay here much longer. Let me find you a warm place just for now. You don't have to stay forever." She hesitated, clutching her blanket. "I can come visit you every day," he added. "And if your mom comes back, I'll make sure she knows where you are." Her small face looked torn. "You promise?" "I promise," he said. She looked at him for a long time as if trying to read his eyes. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Okay." Ethan felt something loosen inside his chest, relief mixed with worry. The next morning, he met Grace at a small community shelter. It was a clean, friendly place, with soft lighting and a few volunteers preparing breakfast for children. When he brought Lily there that afternoon, she held his hand tightly, her small fingers trembling. "It's okay," Ethan whispered. "They're good people here. You'll be safe." Grace came out to greet them. She knelt down to Lily's level and smiled warmly. "Hi there. You must be Lily. I've heard so much about you." Lily stayed quiet, half hiding behind Ethan. Grace spoke softly, her voice calm and kind. "You know, we have a big bed here just for you, and there's soup and pancakes tomorrow morning." Lily's eyes flickered with interest at the word pancakes. Ethan smiled to himself, remembering her story. "It's just for a few days," he told her gently, "until we figure things out." She looked at him and whispered, "You'll come back, right?" "Every day," he said without hesitation. That night, for the first time, Lily slept inside under a real roof, wrapped in a warm blanket. Ethan sat in his car outside the shelter long after leaving her there. He felt something strange and a quiet ache mixed with peace. It had been years since he had cared about someone in this way. His world had been built on numbers, projects, and deadlines. Now it revolved around a little girl with a small blanket and big, scared eyes. Over the next few days, Ethan kept his promise. He visited the shelter every afternoon after work. He brought her small things, storybooks, fruit, warm clothes. Each time she smiled a little more. One day she showed him a drawing she had made, a picture of a house with a big tree beside it, and two stick figures holding hands. "That's you and me," she said proudly. Ethan smiled, touched more deeply than he could show. "That's beautiful, Lily," she grinned. "And the house has pancakes inside," he laughed softly. Of course it does. But beneath the laughter, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her mother. Where was she? Was she alive? Was she still looking for Lily somewhere? The thought haunted him. He asked Grace to help him find out. Together they began searching quietly, visiting hospitals, shelters, and local agencies. They found no trace of the woman. One evening, Grace sighed. "If she's alive, she must be in a difficult situation. But don't lose hope. Sometimes people disappear because they're scared, not because they don't care." Ethan nodded, staring out at the rain. "I just want Lily to have answers." Meanwhile, Lily was slowly coming back to life. The other children at the shelter liked her. She started laughing more, playing with crayons, eating more. One afternoon when Ethan arrived, she ran up to him with excitement. "I helped Grace make sandwiches today," she said proudly. "That's wonderful," he said. "Did they taste good?" She nodded. "The kids liked them." He smiled, feeling a quiet pride in her growth. Still, sometimes when he found her sitting alone, her eyes would drift toward the window, toward the street beyond. "Do you think my mom knows I'm here?" she would ask. "I'm sure she would be happy to know you're safe," he always said gently. She nodded, but her eyes carried a sadness that never quite went away. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep again. He sat by his desk, looking at the small drawing Lily had given him, now framed beside his computer. He realized something had changed inside him. He had spent years chasing goals that filled his wallet but not his heart. But this little girl had reminded him of something real, the simple act of caring. The next morning, he called Clara. "Cancel my meetings today," he said. "Everything?" she asked, surprised. "Yes, everything. I need to take care of something more important." He spent the day driving from one local office to another, following every small lead about Lily's mother. He went through hospital records, social assistance lists, and even old employment files from his company. And finally, just before evening, he found something. A name that matched Lily's mother at one of his company's former cleaning contractors. She had lost her job months ago when the company closed down a division. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't know whether to feel guilt or relief. "Grace," he said when he called her, "I think I found something. I'm going to look into it further tomorrow." That night, when he visited the shelter, Lily ran up to him again. "I drew something new," she said, handing him another picture. This time it showed 3 figures, a woman, a man, and a little girl standing under a tree. Ethan looked at her, smiling softly. "Who's that?" She pointed. "That's me. That's you. And that's my mom. When she comes back, we'll all go to the park." Ethan swallowed hard, trying to hide the emotion in his eyes. "That sounds like a wonderful day, Lily." She smiled brightly, unaware of the tears he was holding back. Later that evening, as he drove home, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't rest until he found her mother. He didn't know how the story would end, but he knew he had to try. The rain began to fall again, softly against the windshield, just like the night he first saw her. Only now it felt different. Back then, the rain had been a reminder of loneliness. Tonight it felt like a promise, that somewhere beyond the gray clouds, there was hope waiting to be found. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan smiled to himself, quietly whispering, "Tomorrow I'll find her. I have to." The next morning started before sunrise. The city was quiet, the streets still washed in the pale blue light of early dawn. Ethan sat at his desk with a folder open, the name of Lily's mother printed at the top of a page. He had spent most of the night reading through reports and records, piecing together a trail that had gone cold months ago. Her name appeared in a file from one of his company's old cleaning service contractors. She had worked there for nearly 2 years before the contract ended, and the business was closed. After that, there were no records. No forwarding address, no contact number, nothing. Ethan rubbed his eyes, feeling the fatigue in his bones. He had faced hundreds of complex problems in his career. Mergers, lawsuits, even economic crises. But this was different. This wasn't about saving a company. It was about saving a person. He made a few phone calls that morning, reaching out to people who might remember her. Some had vague memories, others couldn't recall at all. But one woman, an old supervisor from that cleaning company, remembered her clearly. "Yes, I remember her," the woman said on the phone. "Quiet, hard worker. Always polite. She used to talk about her little girl. Said she was all she had." Ethan leaned forward. "Do you have any idea what happened to her after she left?" There was a pause. "Last I heard, she had some trouble. Missed a few days of work. Someone said she got sick or maybe had an accident. I'm not sure. It was a sad story. Do you know where she lived?" "I think somewhere near the old East Side apartments. That's all I can remember." "Thank you," Ethan said, his voice steady but his heart racing. After ending the call, he stood up and looked out the window. The East Side was one of the oldest parts of the city, filled with crumbling buildings and narrow alleys. It wasn't a place he had visited in years, but if there was even a chance Lily's mother was there, or had been there, he had to go. He left the office early that day, much to Clara's surprise. "Cancel the rest of my meetings," he told her. "Everything?" "Yes, everything," she nodded without question. She had learned by now that when Ethan spoke in that tone, something serious was happening. By mid-afternoon, he was driving through the East Side. The buildings stood close together, old bricks darkened by years of rain and time. He parked his car near a small store and started asking around. Most people shook their heads when he showed the photo he had printed from the company file. But one man who ran a small food stand thought for a moment before saying, "Yeah, I've seen her. Not lately, though. She used to come by here, buy bread and milk. Walked with a limp." "A limp?" Ethan asked quickly. "Yeah, said she had an accident. Nice woman. But she stopped coming one day. That was a while ago." "Do you know where she lived?" "Down the street, second building on the left. Third floor, I think. But that place has been empty for months now." Ethan thanked him and walked toward the building. The stairs creaked as he climbed them, dust floating through the air. When he reached the third floor, he found the apartment door slightly open. Inside, everything was quiet. The room was small and bare, peeling wallpaper, a broken chair, a small bed with no sheets. It looked like someone had left in a hurry. He looked around slowly. On the windowsill lay a small faded photo. He picked it up carefully. It was a picture of a woman and a little girl. The girl was younger, smiling widely, her hair tied in pigtails. He recognized her instantly. It was Lily. Ethan's throat tightened. He stood there for a long time, staring at the photo, realizing just how close he was to finding the truth. He called Grace, the social worker, and told her everything. She agreed to help him check local hospitals. By evening, they had called several, with no luck. But then, at the last hospital they tried, the receptionist on the phone said, "Yes, I believe we had a patient by that name. She was admitted about 2 months ago after a car accident. She recovered, but she hasn't come back to collect her paperwork. Would you like to speak with someone from our records department?" Ethan's heart pounded. "Yes, please." After confirming the details, he learned that the woman had indeed been treated there, but had left before they could arrange long-term care. She hadn't given an address, only a contact number that was no longer active. "Do you know if she's still in the city?" he asked. "I'm afraid we can't say," the staff member replied kindly, "but she might still be nearby. She mentioned looking for work once she got better." That night, Ethan couldn't eat or rest. He kept thinking about what kind of pain Lily's mother must have gone through. Injured, alone, desperate, probably searching for her daughter and not knowing where to start. The next morning, he returned to the same area, checking clinics, shelters, and even small churches. Finally, at a community center, an old volunteer remembered seeing a woman who matched the description. "She came by last week asking if anyone had seen a little girl waiting at a bus stop," the volunteer said. "She looked tired, weak, like she'd been through a lot." Ethan's heart nearly stopped. "Do you know where she went?" "She said she was going to check the Riverside area. That's the place the girl used to wait, right?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." He thanked the volunteer and left immediately. By late afternoon, he was back at the Riverside bus stop. The sight of that familiar bench brought back everything. The first night he'd seen Lily, the fear in her eyes, the promise he had made. He scanned the street, searching every face that passed by. Then across the road he saw her. A thin woman stood near the corner holding onto the railing, her face pale but determined. She had a slight limp, and her clothes were worn, but there was something familiar in her eyes. Ethan crossed the street quickly. "Excuse me," he said softly. Are you looking for someone?" The woman turned to him, startled. Her voice was weak but hopeful. "Yes, see my daughter. Her name's Lily. Have you seen her?" For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. Relief and sadness washed over him all at once. "Yes," he said quietly. "She's safe. She's been waiting for you." Tears filled her eyes immediately. "She's alive?" she whispered. "She's alive," Ethan said. "And she's been waiting every day." The woman covered her mouth with trembling hands. "I tried to come back," she said between sobs. "I had an accident. I was in the hospital for weeks. When I woke up, I had nothing, no phone, no home. I didn't know where she was." Ethan gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's all right now. She's safe. I can take you to her." She nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "Please," she said softly. "Please take me." The drive to the shelter was quiet. The woman stared out the window the whole time, her hands clasped tightly together. Ethan glanced at her a few times, noticing how fragile she looked. But there was also strength in her, a quiet, desperate love that had carried her through everything. When they arrived, Grace met them at the door. "She's in the playroom," she said gently. "We told her you were coming." The woman took a deep breath and walked slowly toward the door. Inside, Lily was sitting on the floor, drawing with crayons. When she looked up and saw her mother standing there, her eyes went wide. "Mom?" she whispered. The woman dropped to her knees, tears falling as she opened her arms. "Lily!" The little girl ran to her, throwing her arms around her neck. Both of them cried, holding on to each other as if they were afraid to ever let go again. Ethan stood near the doorway, his throat tight. Grace put a gentle hand on his arm and whispered, "You did it." He nodded but couldn't speak. Watching them, he felt a deep ache of joy and sadness all at once. It was the most beautiful thing he had seen in years. After a while, Lily looked up at him through tears. "You found her," she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart. She found her way back. I just helped a little." Her mother wiped her eyes and looked at him with gratitude that words couldn't express. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter." Ethan shook his head. "She took care of me, too. You raised a brave girl." They spent the next few hours talking, filling in the missing pieces. Lily's mother explained everything, how she had lost her job, how she'd been trying to find new work when the accident happened, how she'd never stopped thinking about her daughter. Ethan listened quietly. Every word made him realize how fragile life could be, how easily circumstances could push good people to the edge. When he finally left the shelter that night, he walked slowly to his car. The air was cool and calm, and for the first time in a long while he felt peace. He sat in the driver's seat and looked back at the building, watching the lights from the windows. Inside, he could see the faint silhouettes of a mother and child together again. He smiled to himself. The next morning, Ethan woke early and sat with a cup of coffee, thinking. The last few weeks had changed him completely. He had gone from a man obsessed with numbers and profits to someone who understood what it meant to care deeply for another human being. He thought about how many more children like Lily might be out there, waiting, cold, alone, unnoticed. By the time the sun rose, he had made up his mind. Later that week, Ethan called a meeting with his board of directors. Everyone expected it to be about business expansion or another investment. But when he entered the room, his tone was different. "I've made a decision," he said calmly. "We're starting a foundation, one that will help children and parents who've lost their homes or families. No red tape, no long processes. Real help, real care." The room fell silent. No one questioned him. They just listened. He continued. "We'll call it Lily's Place. It'll start right here in this city." Clara smiled from the corner of the room, tears in her eyes. She had never seen her boss like this before. Calm, sure, and full of heart. Over the next few weeks, plans were made, papers signed, and buildings chosen. The first shelter was built near the same riverside street where it had all begun. Ethan made sure it had warm rooms, books, play areas, and staff who genuinely cared. When it opened, he invited Lily and her mother to be the first guests of honor. Lily ran up to him that day, her eyes bright. "It's beautiful," she said, looking around the colorful walls. Ethan smiled and knelt down beside her. "It's for kids like you," he said. "A place to rest, to dream, and to never be alone again." She hugged him tightly. "You're my hero," she whispered. Ethan felt his heart twist gently. "No, Lily," he said softly. "You're mine." That evening after the opening ceremony, Ethan stood outside under the soft glow of the streetlights. Across the road, the old bus stop still stood, the same one where it had all started. He watched the empty bench for a moment, remembering that first rainy night. Then he turned toward the bright lights of the new shelter, hearing the sound of laughter from inside. For the first time in years, he felt whole. He whispered to himself, "Come with me," remembering the quiet promise he had once made to a frightened little girl in the cold. And this time it wasn't just for her. It was for every lost child still waiting in the dark, hoping that someone someday would stop and care enough to help them find their way home. The months passed quietly after the opening of Lily's place. What started as one shelter soon began to grow into something bigger. People from all over the city started visiting, some to help, some to ask for help, and others just to see what kindness could look like when it came from the heart. Ethan never expected that one decision, stopping his car that night, would ripple so far. He visited the shelter almost every day, not as the wealthy CEO people once knew, but as a man who wanted to be present. He'd walk through the rooms, talk to the children, share meals, and listen to their stories. He found himself smiling more often. The air felt lighter around him. The people who worked there started calling him Mr. Ethan, but he always told them to just call him Ethan. Titles didn't matter much anymore. One afternoon, he found Lily sitting on the steps outside, drawing on a small notepad. She had grown a little taller and looked healthier now, her cheeks full of color. When she saw him, her face lit up. "You're late," she said playfully. Ethan smiled. "Am I? I thought I was early." "You're late for my art show," she replied, holding up her notebook proudly. "See? I drew the shelter." He sat beside her and looked. The drawing was simple but full of life. Bright walls, smiling faces, a big sun overhead, and in the middle of it all, a tall man standing with a little girl. "That's us?" he asked gently. She nodded. "That's you. You look serious, though. I think I should add a smile." He laughed softly. "Maybe you should. I don't want to look too scary." She giggled and started coloring a wide smile across his drawn face. "There. Much better." He looked at her for a moment, realizing how much she had changed in such a short time. There was light in her eyes again, the kind of light only love and safety could bring. Her mother walked out just then, holding a basket of freshly folded clothes. She smiled warmly at the two of them. "You're her favorite person to draw, you know," she said teasingly. Ethan chuckled. "I'm honored, though she could make me look a bit taller next time." Lily's mother laughed softly. "You've already done more for us than we can ever repay." Ethan shook his head. "You've already repaid me. Seeing you both happy is enough." She looked at him with quiet gratitude. There was a strength in her now, a calm confidence that had replaced the fear she once carried. She had started helping at the shelter too, assisting new mothers and families who came in with nowhere else to go. People respected her deeply, not because of her past, but because she understood their pain better than anyone else. As time went on, Lily's place became more than just a building. It became a symbol. Local news outlets started covering stories about it, sharing how it was changing lives. Volunteers came from nearby towns and donations began to flow in. One morning, while Ethan was having coffee in his office, Clara entered with a smile. "You're going to want to see this," she said, placing a newspaper on his desk. On the front page was a picture of Lily and her mother standing outside the shelter. The headline read, "Lily's place brings hope to the city's forgotten." Ethan stared at the photo for a long time. In it, Lily was holding a balloon and laughing. Her mother stood beside her, smiling softly, a hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. He felt something warm spread through his chest. This wasn't the kind of success he had built his company on. It was something deeper, something real. Clara watched him for a moment and said, "You've changed a lot, you know." Ethan looked up with a small smile. "Maybe I've just started remembering who I was supposed to be." She nodded. "Whatever it is, the world needs more of it." Later that week, Ethan attended a small event at the shelter. The children had planned a little play to thank him and the staff. Lily played the part of a lost girl who finds her home, and though it was simple, every word seemed to reach straight into his heart. When it ended, all the children gathered around him, laughing and hugging him. He knelt down and said, "You're all the reason this place exists. Never forget that you're important." One boy raised his hand shyly. "Are you going to make another one of these places?" Ethan smiled. "That's the plan. One in every city if I can." The boy grinned. "Then more kids will find their homes too." "Exactly," Ethan said, smiling. As the evening went on, he stood by the window, watching families talk and children play. He thought about his own life, how many years he had spent chasing success, how many nights he had sat in silence in his mansion, thinking that happiness was something money could buy. Now, standing here surrounded by laughter and life, he finally understood what true wealth meant. That night, after everyone had left, Lily came running up to him with a small box in her hands. "Wait, don't go yet," she said, slightly out of breath. He smiled. "What's this?" "It's a surprise," she said proudly. "Open it." Inside was a small keychain made out of colorful beads. It spelled the words, "Thank you." "I made it myself," she said, "so you don't forget us." Ethan knelt down and looked at her seriously. "I could never forget you, Lily." She threw her arms around his neck. "Promise?" He hugged her back tightly. "Promise." When he drove home that night, he hung the keychain on his car's mirror. It swung gently as he drove, catching the light from passing cars. He smiled to himself, realizing that for the first time in years, he wasn't driving toward something, he was driving home. Weeks turned into months again. The second branch of Lily's place opened, followed by a third. The foundation grew stronger, run by people who truly cared. Ethan didn't attend every meeting or event anymore. He didn't need to. The people he trusted carried his vision forward with love and sincerity. He started spending more time outdoors, walking through parks, visiting schools, and speaking quietly with children who reminded him of Lily. Sometimes he'd tell them stories, not about business or money, but about hope, about kindness, about believing that someone will always care. Lily and her mother still visited him often. Sometimes they'd have dinner together. Other times they'd go for walks by the river. Lily loved feeding the ducks, and Ethan always pretended he didn't like it, but he secretly looked forward to it every week. One day, as they sat by the river, Lily said something that made him pause. "You know, I used to think no one could see me, like I was invisible, but then you stopped your car." Ethan looked at her, his throat tight. "Sometimes all it takes is one person to stop," he said quietly. "And then everything changes." She smiled and nodded. "I think I want to be that person when I grow up." He smiled back. "You already are." Years later, Ethan's company had become known not for its wealth, but for its compassion. The foundation had opened shelters across several cities, all carrying the same name, Lily's Place. Each one had the same symbol outside, a small bench under a shining streetlight, a reminder of where it all began. Ethan, now older and slower, still visited from time to time. The world around him had changed, new buildings, new faces, but the feeling of that night never left him. One evening, he sat outside the original shelter, watching the sunset. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, and the laughter of children filled the air. Lily, now a teenager, walked out with a notebook in her hands. She sat beside him quietly. "You come here a lot," she said softly. "I like the peace," he replied, "and the memories." She smiled. "Mom says you're like family to us." He looked at her and nodded slowly. "You are my family, Lily." They sat in silence for a while. Then she asked, Do you ever think about that first night? Every day, Ethan said with a faint smile. That night changed everything for me. She looked at him thoughtfully. It changed everything for me too. A gentle wind blew through the trees, and the sound of laughter drifted from inside. Lily leaned her head against his arm and whispered, "Thank you for not driving away." Ethan looked at her, his eyes soft. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stop." They sat there as the sun disappeared behind the buildings, the first stars beginning to shine. For Ethan, it wasn't just another evening. It was a full circle, a quiet reminder that life's greatest moments often begin when we least expect them. Later that night, when he returned home, he walked through the quiet halls of his house. It wasn't as big or empty anymore. He had sold his mansion long ago and moved into a smaller home near the first shelter. He liked hearing the laughter from down the street. On his desk sat the small framed photo of Lily and her mother taken during the opening of Lily's place. Next to it hung the same keychain. "Thank you." He smiled, turned off the light, and sat by the window for a moment. Outside, the streetlight flickered softly, and for a brief second it felt like the same night when it had all started. The rain, the bus stop, the little girl sleeping in the cold. He thought about how simple it had been, that one small decision to stop and care. The world outside was still filled with people rushing somewhere, their eyes fixed on the road ahead, their hearts too busy to notice what was right in front of them.